Hello and welcome back to my channel, Read Good, Draw Bad, where we love to read really, really good and draw really, really, really bad. And if you notice that my eyes are puffy or I'm sniffing and sneezing, well, that fits right in the theme of today's book, because today we are discussing the master of the nose, Salman Rushdie, in the book Midnight's Children. You know, if any book has surprised me, it is probably this book. This might be one of the most enjoyable books I've ever read that's a classic, and it's also 1,000 pages. Today we are covering the magical, mystical world of India and its history. Written in 1981, this book takes us through the changing history of India as it goes from being a colony of the British colonies to being its own country and independence and a democratic state. This book takes us through the eyes of Salim Sinai, and Salim Sinai is part of the 1,001 children who were born at the stroke of midnight on August 15th, 1947, which is when India got independence from Britain. This remarkable coincidence imbues him not only with the optimism of all the people who are wondering what the new children of the new age of India will be, but also gives each of these young children different magical and mystical powers, and Salim Sinai is no different. Salim has the ability to telepathically conference everyone in to speak to each other all across India and talk about what they consider really important, who have many thoughts about what India should be. Just so you know, I'm doing a reading challenge where I'm reading the Modern Library's top 100 novels of the 20th century. You can find the list in the description below. First, a TLDR on this book. This book is following the life and journey of Salim Sinai as he grows from the very moment of independence from the British Empire, as he tries to navigate his life through various historical events. And what makes this book so interesting is that Salim himself is in conference with all the different children, the 1,001 children across India who were born at the stroke of midnight. And this allows him to ask them, what does he think India should be? What do they think India should be, as Salim tries to navigate his own life events and his own life experiences? And these children start to form what is kind of their own democratic government of the future, because Salim, at his heart, really wants everyone to agree on what should the project of this special group of people be, because we have the ability to talk to each other and it's just us, so it could be us who leads the future of India. The second part of this book that is important to the story of Salim's life and also to the story of another one of Midnight's Children is that Salim is switched at birth. Salim, who is meant to be born into a poor, very poor family, is switched at birth with his lifelong rival Shiva, and Salim is given a prophecy as a young man, and it's a very long prophecy and it's about all of his life, but one line is particularly relevant, which is, "A son will never be older than his motherland, neither older nor younger. There shall be two heads, but you will see only one." Now, his counterpart Shiva was raised in the slums, which gave him a very different kind of life and forced Shiva to have to make very difficult choices. It's also important to note that Shiva's name is named after the Hindu god of destruction, which plays thematically into this book several times. And Shiva is also associated with procreation, which makes a lot of sense because there are multiple moments about babies and birth that involve the rivalry between Shiva and Salim. And there are several tensions because Salim finds out first that he's been switched at birth and he has no idea how to tell Shiva this problem, because of course it affects Shiva directly. Shiva was robbed of the life he should have had, and Salim got it instead through no fault of his own. Now, this story is broken into 3 books. It's sort of like 3 books in one, kind of a 3-for-1 deal. The first period we follow is Dr. Adam Aziz, who is Salim's grandfather. We follow Adam's love story with his grandmother, who is quite the battle axe, as well as the many tales involving Adam's nose, because the nose as a symbol is very important in this book, and as well as Dr. Aziz's entanglement with various political individuals through no fault of his own, including the one called the Hummingbird, who was involved in one of the many massacres that happened around the time of India starting to gain independence. So we get a look into the life in colonized India and what that looked like before India's independence. In the second book, historically, we follow India's independence itself and the Midnight Children, who are all born at the stroke of midnight during independence. This was a very well documented media event, and a lot of people in India had hope and optimism for the future and for the children who are going to be born into a democratic state, and as well as how the historical events affect Salim and the 1001 Midnight's Children directly. And during this book, this is when Salim learns about the crime of the nurse who switched the children at birth and what the ramifications of that action are for both Salim and for Shiva. And we also follow the breakdown of Salim's family structure as his father ends up becoming a very unhappy alcoholic and his sister becomes a very famous pop star. Which is kind of like a weird combo, but that's what happens. In the third book, we follow Salim as he's coming into adulthood, and he is severely affected by the Indo-Pakistan War in 1965, which ends up killing most of his family. And from several events that involve the war, he ends up meeting up with one of the 1001 children, Parvati the Witch, as she's called in the book, and his ultimate final showdown with Shiva happens in the third book. Finally, the book ends with Salim, or perhaps the author, ruminating about what did it mean to be one of the 1001 Midnight's Children, and was it a successful project? Was the idea of being optimistic about the future of India a good idea, or did the project itself fail? And this is approximately where the story ends, where the author leaves us hanging to ask ourselves, when a new country is born, can we put a hope in the future for our children, for the future, and what does that even mean? Now, thematically, this book is mainly about two things. This book asks the question, what is personal history and what is historical events? And in this book, you will constantly see how actions that Salim takes, or Shiva takes, or Parvati takes, or any of the 1001 Midnight's Children are intertwined and cannot be separated from the historical events that happen throughout India. As Salim says in the book, to understand one life, you have to swallow the whole world. Because the magical and mystical are woven in with realistic events. So we're never quite sure if something is real or not real, or if Salim's just making something up, but we do know that he's deeply affected by the history of India and the tumultuous events that led to the democracy that is India today, and also the different wars that played out throughout India's history. And you can see this through the idea of a family history having an impact on a country. Because this whole book is about the family history of how his family lived and eventually died, and how Salim plans to carry on even in the face of great difficulty. And Salim himself places himself directly in the middle of historical events throughout the novel, even though he sometimes says, I know I'm not the main character here, but for me, this is what happened to me. And I'm just going to give you a quote from the book that illustrates that. Who am I? My answer. I am the sum total of everything that went before me, of all I have been, seen, done, of everything done to me. I am everything, everyone whose being in the world was affected by mine. I am anything that happens after I've gone, which would not have happened if I had not come. Nor am I particularly exceptional in this matter. Each I, everyone is now 600 million plus of us, contains a similar multitude. I repeat for the last time, to understand me, you have to swallow the world. And for Salim, one of his goals in the book, and perhaps in his life, is for these Midnight's Children to come to a consensus about what their big project should be, about what they should do to move India into the modern world, to make India a place worth living in. And unfortunately, Salim learns, just like in all democracies, not everyone agrees on what the best way forward is to live your life, or what the best way forward is to move the history of a country and the direction a country should go. So thematically, you can think that this book is especially about what does it mean to be a democracy? What does it mean to get people to agree as a group about a direction that we all should go if we're all connected in some way? And that is a very, very deep thought that bears a lot of thinking about. I think you could write a lot of very interesting essays about. Now, on to the review. This book is a masterpiece in what is called magical realism. It paints a realistic view of the world that is in line with historical events, but also includes elements of the mystical or magical that blurs the line between reality and fiction. There are many times where you think that Salim might be exaggerating how one character is or how one historical event is, and we think that Salim might be at times an unreliable narrator, but in reality he acknowledges his unreliability, and instead he talks more about how India is a magical place with lots of myths in it, a lot of half-truths, a lot of things that are somewhat true and somewhat not true, and this really brings you into the whole discussion of what is history anyways, since history itself is a bunch of half-truths and things to be uncovered. And both the main character and I think Rushdie himself uses magical realism to lessen the harsh impact of very real events that had a huge upheaval on a country that was trying to grow into its own kind of world. But part of the reason I like Salim Sinai so much in this book is he's an idealist, and his idealism really drives all the points home about what India could be in this book, and you can really feel the author leaning hard on the main character to try and explain India could and should be a magical, amazing place. We should make it so. And here's a quote talking about some of the idealism in Midnight's Children. In fact, all over the new India, the dream we all shared, children were being born only partially the offspring of their parents. The children of midnight were also the children of the time. Fathered, you understand, by history. It can happen, especially in a country which itself is a sort of dream. And there is something here to what Salim is saying, that India itself is a kind of dream because it was born out of some very exceptional circumstances that needs to discover who is India, what is India, and that idea of a country having its own personality is something that history can only define over generations and generations of families and societies. I really think that this book is a really great primer for someone like me who isn't really well versed in the history of India. It was a great time for me to, as I read the book, look up various historical events that happened and why they happened in India. So if you are looking for something that's sort of an educational fun primer and might get you more interested in the history of India, I think this is that book. So this, I think, is a standout, absolutely awesome book, and I highly recommend that you read it. And if you love this book, I hope you tell me about it in the comments below, because I think Rushdie's writing is just so on point, and the way he describes various individuals or various events, I really feel are brought to life by excellent prose. Okay, well, that's all for me this week. I hope you are having a fantastic time reading some great books right now. Next time, we will be reading Loving by Henry Green, where we go to see some servants having some gossip time. Okay, well, that's all for me this week. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and you can hit the bell notifications if you want to know when I release the next video. If you have thoughts about this book, please leave some comments for me. I'd love to discuss this book with anyone else who's read it, because I think it's a very small number of people. As always, I hope you're having a great week, and stay curious, stay reading.